Under the harsh sun of the Arizona frontier, the hunter rode alone, rifle across his lap, hunger in his gut. The winter had been cruel, game scarce, land unforgiving. He'd left his cabin before dawn, hoping to bring home meat for the long days ahead. Dust rose behind his horse's hooves, and his eyes scanned the ridge for deer or elk. But the wilderness had other plans. When he reached the creek, he saw movement, not an animal but a figure. Bare, trembling, covered in mud, an Apache woman. She stood in the shallows, her long black hair tangled, her body bruised by wind and hunger. For a moment he thought she was a ghost. The woman looked up, eyes wild with fear, as he raised his rifle out of instinct. Then, seeing her frailty, he lowered it. "Easy," he murmured, voice rough from disuse. She didn't speak, just shivered. He pulled his coat from his saddle and draped it over her shoulders. "Come on," he said quietly, "you'll freeze out here." She hesitated, then followed. The horse snorted, uneasy, but the hunter led her toward his cabin through the endless silence of the plain. Inside, the small cabin smelled of smoke and old wood. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She drank greedily, water running down her chin. He lit a fire, the light flickering against her hollow face. "Name?" he asked, but she didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to herself, then whispered a word he couldn't understand. "All right," he said softly. "You can rest here." She curled near the fire, the coat wrapped tight, her body trembling less with cold and more with exhaustion. He sat across from her, wondering what pain had brought her to this desolate place. Days passed before she spoke again. She would help with chores, gathering wood, mending clothes, cleaning without being told. He tried to make her eat more, but she always left her portion half-finished. Slowly he learned that she had escaped a raiding party. Her people captured, her family gone. He didn't ask for details. The silence between them said enough. He repaired her moccasins with strips of hide, his rough hands gentle for the first time in years. She began to hum sometimes, soft tunes that made the cabin feel less lonely. As spring crept over the land, she found her strength again. One morning she was gone. He found her by the creek where they'd first met, washing clothes, bare feet in the cold water. When she saw him, she smiled faintly. "You, help," she said, her English broken but sincere. He nodded. "You helped me too," he replied. They shared quiet laughter, rare, fragile, like sunlight breaking through clouds. That night, as rain pattered on the roof, she sat close to the fire, hair damp, face soft. He watched her, guilt and longing tangled in his chest. He had saved her, but she had saved him from something far worse, the emptiness of solitude. Summer came with green pastures and warm nights. She no longer wore his coat. The hunter began teaching her words. River, sky, home. She would repeat them, her accent thick but sweet. One evening she pointed to herself again and said, "Nara." He smiled. "Nara," he repeated, liking the sound. When she pointed to him, he hesitated before answering. "John," she said it softly like a prayer. The bond between them grew in silence. No vows, no promises, just shared breath beneath the desert stars. But peace in the frontier never lasted long. One afternoon, a group of riders appeared, soldiers searching for escaped captives. John stood at the door, rifle ready. "I ain't seen no one," he said flatly. The officer narrowed his eyes, scanning the cabin, but left after a tense silence. When the dust settled, Nara emerged from behind the haystack, her eyes filled with tears. "They take me," she whispered. "They take all." He reached out and touched her cheek. "Not this time," he said. "You're safe here." That night she sat by the fire, clutching his coat again. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why you help?" John looked into the flames, voice low. "Because no one helped my wife when she needed it." It was the first time he'd spoken of her. Nara said nothing, just reached out and took his hand. Her touch was light, trembling, not out of fear but out of trust. Outside the coyotes howled, but inside something long frozen began to thaw. Autumn brought color to the hills. The ranch began to thrive again, fences repaired, animals fattened, the air filled with quiet laughter. She would hum while cooking, and sometimes he'd join in clumsily, making her smile. One evening, he returned from hunting with a deer slung over his horse. She ran out to meet him barefoot, her face glowing in the sunset. "Meat," she said proudly. He chuckled. "That's right. Meat." They dressed it together, their hands brushing now and then, each touch saying more than words ever could. Months later, The first snow fell. John watched her by the fire, sewing a patch on his shirt. Her hair gleamed in the light, her movements calm and sure. He realized then how deeply she had become part of his life. Not as a guest, not as a rescued soul, but as his heart's quiet companion. "Nara," he whispered. She looked up, and in her eyes he saw the same longing reflected back. No words were needed. She crossed the small space between them, and when he held her, it wasn't desire, it was peace. Years later, people in the nearby town spoke of the quiet rancher who lived with an Apache woman and never bothered anyone. Some said she'd bewitched him, others said he'd gone soft. But those who saw them together, tending the land, laughing by the creek, and knew the truth. He had gone hunting for meat that winter's day, but what he brought home was life itself. And in a world torn by hate and loneliness, that was the rarest catch of all.